What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with yet another album review, and today I am talking about the sophomore effort from German/Swedish death thrash band Leper Colony with Those of the Morbid. I was supposed to have reviewed this a few weeks ago, but I guess the release date got pushed back to early May, but here I am talking about it now. This also came out on May 2nd, this time on Testimony Records, and like I said, this is their second album, and it's somewhat of a supergroup, mainly with two members. We have Raga Johansson, whose freaking list of bands he's been in and is in still today is fucking endless. But the vocals, we get a legendary vocalist, Mark Grew, formerly of Morgoth, now currently in Hell and Insidious Disease, among many other bands because he's a busy dude. And this is their second album. I guess their first one came out in 2022 and somehow missed it, but I heard from people saying it was a pretty good debut. And yeah, this is described as death thrash, and I think that's accurate for the most part. However, I would also throw in punk on this too, because top to bottom, this album is laced with like lots of punky vibes, and it really gets that way going with the opening track, Facing the Faceless, where you get grooves and riffs and melodic tags that almost remind me a lot of Obituary. And then you get into these big, like, D-beat gallops. And D-beats are really one of the big things on this album. Like, it's mostly D-beat oriented. You do get some, like, thrashier beats as the album progresses. And, of course, some, like, lumbering grooves. But when it comes down to when they get faster, it's more of, like, a punky, hardcore fast rather than thrash a lot of times. But I will say, one thing that is definitely apparent on every single song except for the last one, lots of nasty crawling tremolo riffs, whether they be like just more on the heavier spectrum or sometimes it turns a little bit more melodic. But another thing that really comes through a lot on this album, double time stomps, which kind of adds a little bit more to the thrash element, but it also adds a little more of that old school death metal aspect onto it as well. And then the lead work, for the most part, you get some pretty solid leads on this album, even a couple of times, like in Facing the Faceless and Apocalypse Horror, which kind of a dumb title, but those two songs, and also Master's Voice, those three songs have some really cool harmonies with the guitars. Speaking of Master's Voice, it starts off a little bit on the murkier side, and it again comes in with groove and double time, kind of like Bolt Thrower a little bit, before it settles back into a D beat, and then later the grooves lumber along. And then to a song like Flesh to Rot to Ashes, very briefly it starts off with this like evil, sinister melody before it unleashes into like proper thrashy beats and thrashy riffs. And it's very energetic. It's one of the more energetic songs on the entire album, but even the lead section here, they slow it down to like almost Death Doom territory. Realm of Madness, I would say Realm of Madness and Those of the Morbid Inclination, both of those songs, while they start off kind of similar or have similar ideas like tremolo riffs on top of punky D beats and grooves, Realm of Madness focuses primarily on the groove, but you do get some chugs and some blast beats, whereas Those of the Morbid Inclination, it does turn a little bit thrashier towards the end. And then Apocalypse Horror, I would say that's another one of the more thrashy barn burners on here. It shreds pretty well at the beginning, and then you get like more machine gun riffs rather than tremolos, even though you do get tremolos, obviously, and some more groove. And then even some machine gun riffs on Creature from the Deep, which also, the beginning, while you hear these machine gun riffs, there's like a weird twang going on top, and it's on top of a double time stomp. And then the closer, A Story in Red, which the longest track of the album at a little over 4 minutes. Like, for the most part, this album is just short, sweet, and to the point, with all these songs being at average about 3.5 minutes. But this song being a little over 4, it starts off with a clean melody, and there's some gallops in here, but for the most part, it's more of like a melodic, lumbering song, almost kind of like modern gate or like recent Gate Creeper, not modern Gate Creeper, but like recent Gate Creeper. And yeah, for the most part, these songs do pack a lot of like that old school death metal and death thrash aspect. However, that leads me to getting into my issues with this album. I feel this album is just stuck in one gear throughout the majority of the album, and then also the song The Age of Insanity. While you do get some moments of bright spots, like the slower thrash beats and the double time that comes in, it kind of feels a bit generic. Like the song itself kind of feels like Death Thrash 101, but without a lot of the heart, at least in my personal opinion. And on top of that, some of the transitions on here just didn't quite stick the landing for me on here. And of course, it just kind of felt like not as inspired to me. I don't know, maybe I need to listen to the debut album to kind of get the full scope, but judging from this album, it just didn't sound that inspired. Like, I'm sure they were trying, but to my ears, the album just kind of stays in one gear. It's just very meat and potatoes, but there's a real lack of seasoning on those meat and potatoes. But I'm not saying this is a bad album, far from it. It's a pretty solid album for what it is. I just wish there could have been more songwriting variety, maybe a little more thrash and less punk. But overall, this is still a solid album. I give this a 3 out of 5. It's solid for what it's going for. There are some cool moments on here peppered in from top to bottom, but it's just lacking a little bit of thrash energy for me. But of course, those are just my opinions. What did you guys think? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. But until next time, thank you for watching. Keep your horns high and your dreams wet.